people continue to celebrate in the streets of Harare. I'm joined in the studio by Judith Tyson, Research Fellow with Overseas Development Institute. Good to have you with us. So, Zimbabwe at a massive crossroads right now. What do you think this is going to mean for ZANU-PF?
Well, I think it really depends where they take it in terms of the economic situation. There's clearly an opportunity here for reform in Zimbabwe, which would probably be much more positive outcome, including for ZANU-PF. But there may be also a scenario where Mnangagwa reconsolidates power, in which case we'll probably see very little change.
Yeah, because the economic situation in Zimbabwe is an absolute basket case, isn't it? Hyperinflation and no currency of their own.
It's been shocking. The size of the economy is halved in the last 2 decades. We see unemployment rates of 95% in Zimbabwe at the moment. And as you mentioned, the situation has become a lot more severe in the last 18 months because of the liquidity crisis.
So whoever takes over from Mugabe, how can they rescue this situation? Can they rescue the situation?
Well, it's certainly a very severe situation, and they probably need to start with the most basic reforms. So, in particular, obviously, there's a desperate need for political stability and a credible government. Government finances desperately need to be reformed as well. The government is effectively bankrupt, and in particular, the private sector needs to have confidence rebuilt, so that investment, which has also collapsed in Zimbabwe, and has been one of the reasons for the economic problem, starts to reignite.
So, how can they attract international donors, investments, or even a rescue package?
Well, I think it's going to be a tough climb back towards credibility, particularly with ZANU-PF, and we've seen things like asset appropriations from the private sector, for example. So firms have had basic assets like land, but also cash appropriated by the government. And when we see that kind of environment, it's very difficult and a long process to rebuild confidence. I think, though, that we could see international donors assisting with that, but I think they will insist on political and economic reforms being in place first.
And when you see pictures like these of people celebrating in the streets, it's quite clear that many of them blame Robert Mugabe for the dire straits they've been economically. What has life been for ordinary Zimbabweans under Mugabe? Well,
I think it's been shocking, and their livelihoods have been crushed, and people have been desperate for improvements, in their day-to-day living standards. The government failed to provide basic things like education, healthcare, infrastructure, electricity, and the transport network has collapsed. So people's daily lives have been very severely impacted. I'm not surprised to see the scenes of jubilation. We have to hope that economic reforms will deliver some of the things that they're hoping for.
I was reading stories that people could they could have thousands and thousands of dollars in the bank, but you could only get $20 out at a time.
Oh, absolutely. And people in Harare sleep outside the banks overnight to try to get access to US dollars, and then they're probably given maybe $20 or $30, and only some people will be served. I mean, those basic problems are very difficult for people in their daily lives.
And this whole ludicrous problem of where they had to ditch their own currency, that was because Mugabe ordered the printing of lots more currency in order to pay for imports?
Well, what happened was they started to print, basically create money, because the government was bankrupt at that time, so they printed their own money. It caused hyperinflation. But at that time, probably the adoption of the US dollar was a sound economic policy in those circumstances. But of course, now it's causing the liquidity price problems that we see today.
So what kind of reforms does Zimbabwe need to have to make it look credible to outside investors?
Well, I think the first thing they need to do is tackle the government finances and corruption, which has been very severe in Zimbabwe, and try to look much more credible in terms of their economic management. So we'll see what policies they bring forward.
OK, good. They've obviously got a long road ahead of them,
Indeed,
but let's see what happens next. Judith, thank you very much indeed for that. Judith
Thank you.
Tyson there.